Let's go back in time to the year 2000 real quick. Where were you? Some of you may have been in high school like me. Others just started their jobs. Others just started their families. Some of you weren't even born yet, which is brutal. In the year 2000, I was making pizza. I wasn't making the pizza, but I was putting toppings on the pizza. It was a pretty straightforward system. You take the pizza out of the fridge. It's already been sauced and cheesed, and it was in like a metal shell. I can't think of what you would call it. And I have this metal rod that you would poke holes in. Don't know why, but you always have to do that really quick. Otherwise, you get the bubbles on the dough. So I guess that was the reason. But I actually like the bubbles, so I don't know. But anyways, you poke the holes, and then you put the toppings on the pizza. Always make sure they're evenly distributed. And then you send it on the conveyor. 6 or 7 minutes later, she comes out on the other side. You got a pizza. Get it out of the shell, you cut it, 8 slices, box it, stick the slip in the lip of the box, goes on top of the oven, bada bing, bada boom. I do wish I got a chance to work other stations, the grill or the fry or making sandwiches, but they had a stacked lineup back in the day of Mr. Z's Pizza. Heavyweights, veterans of the pizza game. Guys like George, who introduced me to Tom Jones, his uncle, Gugu, Roddy, Hello Bali, Clinton and its nicknames. A lot of people I went to high school with worked there. One person who worked there was my friend Christina, a.k.a. Deans, a.k.a. Diener. At first, I wouldn't say we were friends, but we were friendly. We worked together. We had some mutual friends. She was a year younger than me. And then over the years, we would lose touch, but then whether it was a friend's wedding or someone had a beach house in Old Orchard, I feel like we always saw each other, and it was always really good to see Deans. And if I'm being honest, I definitely went through a period where I had a crush on her. I would check in with our mutual friend Jill once every few months for years. Shout out Jill. And I'd be like, yo, Jill, what's up with Deans? She's married, Ad. Or she has a boyfriend, Ad. Garage. Just kidding. Love you, Jill. But fast forward to present day in my story, fall of 2017. I'm living in Vegas. I just quit South Point because I didn't want to walk around with a shaved face. And I'm sitting by the pool, and like most people do when they're lonely, they post on social media and make it seem like things are better than they are. And that's what I did. I posted a picture of me at the pool. I think I even went a step further and was desperate enough to caption it like, who's visiting? And then you sit there and you wait for the phone to vibrate. You open up, you see who's viewed it. And then someone popped up at the top of the screen, Deans. She replied, let's see what she has to say. And I remember it was something like, I'm so down. When? And of course I immediately thought, oh shit, okay. This is actually happening. And if she's going to come out by herself, that means she's single? So what does that mean? And we didn't even really talk that much leading up to it. It was very comfortable yet completely random. Maybe not random, but whatever is slightly less than random. It's hard to explain how I was feeling during this time. I definitely wanted people to visit, and I was especially excited for her to come out. My brain went to a place of maybe this is going to lead to something, which it kind of did. And I remember thinking, this is what I need. After all these years, me and Deans are going to end up being together. Who would have thought? And I'll stop gambling and, or maybe just I won't gamble as much. I'll just do it once in a while. We'll go up to Saratoga with Jimmy and Poppy. Shout out. I remember picking her up at the airport, and it was a little awkward. We did one of those mid-car hugs because I didn't want to get out because you weren't supposed to stop for too long. I had some things planned. We were going to stay at Caesars. I had tickets to a comedy show, a couple reservations for dinner. I remember the first thing we did was we went down to Old Vegas on Fremont Street. And we went and got happy hour appetizers and drinks, and we quickly slid right back into Ad and Deans. I was telling her all about New York and my drive cross country and my first few months in Vegas. And she was telling me about her unfortunate divorce and her work and how she's been at the same place since getting out of college, and she was doing so well. By the time we got the check, we were both sufficiently buzzed and we were riding that wave. In that moment, I was so excited she was there, and I was so looking forward to spending time with her. I do remember at one point, whether it was the taxi ride back or maybe when we were getting ready to go out for that first night, we mentioned playing a Keno slot together or having her throw dice if we played craps. She was down for whatever, and I was obviously excited for that. But what I didn't take into consideration is how I would react if we lost. Because when I'm gambling, 80 to 90% of the 20 years that I gambled, I obviously gambled alone. And when I lost, I just kept playing, and I would eventually get more and more miserable, and I would chase and borrow money and overdraft. And then once I've exhausted all my resources, I go home and I'm miserable. But now I'm with someone else. Now I need to be normal. And unfortunately for me, and especially unfortunately for Deans, Ad is not normal when it comes to gambling. So for the next few nights while she was there were a few winning sessions, but for the most part, it was losing when we gambled. We played our birthday numbers, 5, 7, 9, 28, did not hit once. And I would constantly be slipping in and out of my normal behavior. I would find myself slowly fading into anger and depression. She'd be having a good time and be like, Ad, what's the matter? I'm good, I'm fine. But if my tone was off later in the night after lots of losing, she could tell. And then there'd be a follow-up question, which depending on how much money I was down or what mood I was in, it would lead to an even harsher tone from me. And then I would notice that she was getting a little bored, or clearly she doesn't want to be sitting at a slot machine for hours on end. And you guys know me. I didn't drink a lot when I gambled. Probably one of the only good decisions I ever consistently made when I gambled. But Deans is in Vegas. She's on vacation. Who am I to judge her if she wants to have a cocktail? And spoiler alert, once I started losing and the night got later and I was all set with drinking because I was too depressed from losing, I judged her for wanting to keep drinking. And this vicious cycle went on for the entire weekend. We would have a good moment like sitting by the pool or going to a comedy show or having a good meal, having some laughs. But then I would need to gamble. And that would lead to me shutting down or getting agitated or just being fucking shitty. And it got worse and worse as the losses piled up. But we kept trying to get it back, and I think even at one point I might have opened up to her about my gambling. But I can't even admit that it wasn't for ulterior motives. Maybe I wanted her sympathy. Maybe I was laying the groundwork to eventually ask her for money. I'm not going to give too much more away because the Dean's episode is coming. The interview is in the can. It's currently being edited, and we will be getting into all of these details very soon. But the trip wasn't all bad because it was good enough where we kept in touch, and she came out again for her birthday 6 months later. So even though this should have been a wake-up call, considering I had never in the 20 years that I had known Deans at the time, we had never had anything but good times. I had never had a disagreement with her. We had never had any type of issue. Yet we just spent 72 hours together, and we had multiple. I wouldn't call them fights, but they were, let's say, spats or disagreements. And at the root of every single one of them was the fact that I was sick. I was in such a bad place because of my gambling, and it had taken over my life at this point. And unfortunately, these 3 days were just the beginning. I've said it before and I'll say it again. As a compulsive gambler, we often hurt those closest to us. We take away the ability for someone to live their own life. I did this to a lot of people. I took advantage of them. I manipulated them. A long list of people. And Dean's is pretty close to the top of that list. Welcome to the modern meeting. All right, welcome everybody to the Modern Meeting. My name is Adam. I'm a compulsive gambler. My last bet, February 8th, 2022. This is episode number 32. 32 episodes. Pretty good. I'm trying a different camera angle. I hate it, as usual. I can't see. I can't put my glasses down because then it looks like this. So, right? But at least I could see right now. But now you guys can't see my eyeballs, and it looks weird. So I got to go like that. And now I'm just a blue blur. Look at that shirt, though. It's pretty good, right? Okay. Anyways, what a day today. Today is part one of my two-part conversation with Sam DeMello, who I met through Christina Cook. Shout out Christina Cook and the Broke Girl Society. Sam came up with this app called Evive. I used to say Evive, but it's Evive. And, don't want to give anything away. You're going to hear all about it. But Sam has kind of taken me under his wing these last 6 weeks. And today, he was nice enough to get me an invite to the Massachusetts Problem Gaming Conference or Problem Gambling Conference. But just when you think that, right? Like when you think that it's easy for me on this podcast to say, there's a bunch of different paths to recovery, which I do believe there is. But even my path, right? Like my path to recovery, I think I know what it is. And then today, by listening to people and meeting people and listening to like actual doctors who have studied gambling and addiction for years. And so I was in one of these rooms where someone was talking, and then at the end they do a Q&A. And I very quickly realized that the majority of the people in the room were either like doctors or they worked in the field. Like there was a lot of therapists and peer specialists and a lot of degrees in the room, a lot of PhDs, a lot of MDs, and they were talking about different ways to treat addiction, specifically gambling. And they talked about meetings at the beginning, and then the rest of it was like anything from mushrooms to what was it? It was the magnet thing where they magnetize your brain. I think it was TMS, TS, ST. I don't know. Don't quote me on that. I probably should have looked it up before I hit record, but it's fine. But the one question that I was going to ask, and then I pussied out because they were all asking different like doctor questions. They were talking about how maybe some of this therapy, maybe some of this medication can lead to someone not gambling as much or managing their gambling or managing their urges. And I want to raise my hand and be like, hi, excuse me. Yes, I'm in recovery. Hello, I'm not a doctor, but what I've been told and what I think is pretty accurate is that once you cross that line into compulsive gambling, a little yellow book, a little birdie told me there's no such thing as small bet experimentation. There's no such thing as like gambling just a little bit. So explain to me what you mean by this. And of course I wouldn't have worded it like that, but I didn't raise my hand. I didn't ask this question, but I did bring it up to Sam after, who you're about to hear. And Sam was like, well, you'd be surprised at the data. You'd be surprised at the research. And it's like, boom, put yourself in your place, Adam. Like, it's not just about that yellow book. It's not just about your experience. So I hear him out. And then I realized that, listen, if back in 2005, 2006, I took some mushrooms or someone magnetized my head, who knows? Like, that might have done something, right? Like, do I believe that I was born with genetics that made me a compulsive gambler? Absolutely. But I don't think it's the only thing that made me a compulsive gambler. I think it was a bunch of different things, stuff that I don't even know about. So I think if someone had caught me early on, maybe it would have never developed into what it eventually developed into. Once again, I love the fact that I was in a place filled with a bunch of smart people that care about the people out there right now, care about the fact that we need to do more. And I was inspired today. I really was. And I look forward to continuing to not only expand my knowledge, but explore different ways for my recovery. But yeah, so I keep referencing Sam. Sam, he created this app called Evive. And what he will tell you in part two, and what I'll briefly paraphrase right now, if everything about gambling is now available on our phones that we can put in our pocket, why not have something that is available on our phones and put in our pocket that will help us with gambling? Whether it's a track where we don't want to gamble anymore, or a track where we want to manage our gambling before it gets out of control. And that's what Evive is. And I just really believe in this guy. I really believe in Sam. I think he's amazing. I'm glad to call him a friend. I'm glad to continue to be able to work with him in the future and collaborate with him. And I'm really excited for you guys to hear his story, because with all of this being said, he's also a compulsive gambler in recovery. So, part one of two is right now my conversation with Sam DeMello. All right, so today's guest is the founder and CEO of Evive. Evive is an app aimed at transforming how individuals and communities address problem gambling by blending advanced technology with proven evidence-based methods. Their mission is to make healthier gambling habits accessible to everyone. Please welcome to the modern meeting, Sam DeMello. Sam, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Adam.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
absolutely. So, besides being the founder and the CEO of Evive, you are also a compulsive gambler in recovery. Um,
Yep.
so
Yeah,
before,
I've been in recovery.
yeah, before we
Yeah,
before
yeah.
we get to Evive, I want to hear your story. I've heard bits and pieces based on previous conversations we've had, but let's before we before I ask the question I always ask, which is when did you have a problem? We're gonna mix it up this week. Just take me back to the beginning. Like, when did it start?
Yeah, totally, man. It's interesting. The more that I think about it, the more that I think it started earlier, right? But the first official gambling that I remember, I started playing poker when I was 12 years old. I saw Chris Moneymaker win the World Series of Poker on ESPN. And, I grew up in Oakland, California. My friends were big time athletes, like really gifted. And I am like a 5'6" Jewish kid. you know, I could never really compete on, the basketball court or any of the other
Mm,
fields. Um, and I think poker for me was something that, like, came really easy to me. I always loved card games and strategy and
mm,
stuff, and I always kind of had an intuition. I've always been good at kind of reading people. Um, and it was definitely the first thing that I was ever good at that was cool,
mm,
that my friends thought were cool. So I started playing in home games, and, you know, I got really into it. My parents were really supportive. They sat down, they talked to me about sex and drugs, but they had no idea what gambling addiction was or gambling related harm. And the way that they saw it was, I could have been out on the streets running around and drinking and doing drugs and stuff, but instead I was in our basement, losing $10 with my buddies, and we were hanging out and we weren't on screens or playing video
right.
games. Um, and right from the beginning, there were major warning signs that I just didn't know to look for,
Mm-hmm.
right? Anytime I played, if I lost, I would buy back in. And if I lost that, I would borrow money from my friends. You know, it was all I wanted to do, right? It kind of took over my life and a lot of my mental space. And, as I grew up, I just played more and more seriously. Home games with my buddies, home games with other people that were more serious about it. When I got to college, I went to UC Santa Barbara. I immediately found 3 or 4 guys that were really into it, and we played in the dorm rooms and, you know, played every night for increasing amounts of money. And then right when I turned to 18, there was a tribal casino, maybe 45 minutes away from, my
Mm,
college. And it went from, yeah, we'll go on a Saturday night once or twice a month to Friday and Saturday to, 6 times a week. It really got to the point where I would work at a really fancy job working at Wendy's.
Oh
um,
wow.
and I would
I
take all of
I
that
definitely
money
have
and save
follow-up
it. And
questions to that. Oh my God. But keep going, keep going.
yeah, man. I mean, I was at a point in college where like I was doing the bare minimum to get by in my classes and skipping a lot of classes and spending most of my time in a smoky card
Mm,
room, you know? And I don't know if you've ever been to UC Santa Barbara, but it is beautiful, right? It's like right on the beach. It is not a place that you that you would want to leave for a smoky
right.
card room.
And so I mean, so it sounds like our stories are very similar at the beginning, and the last thing you bring up, it's so funny. How many different beautiful places or exciting places did I live as an addict, and I didn't appreciate them at all? You know what I mean? I feel like that is a common theme for a lot of us, is that coincidentally we're in these settings that we should appreciate and that we should explore, and all we're doing, like you said, is being inside a card room.
Totally. And the way that I conceptualized of it was like, if I lost money, I had my tuition money and I had my rent money, and that money was just, fun
Mm,
money, right? It was like if I lost too much at the casino, I just couldn't go out with my buddies, right? I couldn't go and party with my friends. And all that did was just make me play more
mm.
poker, right? Try to win the money back, learn more, figure out how to improve my game.
When you think about these early days, two-part question. Number one, was anyone else in your friend group experiencing the same, or were they headed down the same path as you as far as compulsive gambling? And number two, looking back on it now, like most of us, was this just an escape because, like you said, you kind of grew up and you didn't really fit in, and gambling was just, oh, I'm cool now. I'm with the cool guys who were all crushing 1-2 no limit.
Yeah, man. I had no conception of any other people that were struggling with gambling.
Mm,
And at that point, I didn't even think of myself as struggling with gambling, right? Um, when I pictured, like, if you would have asked me back then when I was 20, what is a gambling addict? Like, what does somebody look like? I would think maybe the guys that I saw sometimes at the horse track that, like, looked disheveled and, maybe borderline homeless and, had their last $5 on a ticket on some horse, right? I never thought about that. Or maybe I would think about somebody that was playing, what I considered a sucker's game, like a slot machine or blackjack, because I really thought of poker as a game of skill, right? I thought, I am smarter than the system. I am smarter than these tourists. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to take their money, right? And I think for me, did I think about it as an escape? No, I really thought about it as a way for me to build friends and be cool.
okay.
When I was in college, like I always felt a little out of place, right? I never liked the way that I looked. I always had, I think socially, I was always like cool adjacent, you know? I've been playing music for a long time. I played in a pretty serious band in college. I played the drums, but I was never, at a show with girls coming up to me afterwards, right? They
Right.
wanted to talk to the lead singer. I was just kind of there. And I think that poker was the one thing that was really like, it was mine, it was cool, it was something that, like, I kind of liked the secrecy of it.
Mm.
I liked the idea that I was in the casino late at night and nobody really knew what I was. And it was kind of this like alter ego.
And so, were you a winning player?
Um, I was probably a break-even player.
Okay.
I was a winning player at 1-2 and the games that I was really comfortable in,
Mm-hmm.
but pretty quickly that wasn't exciting enough for me.
Right.
So I would move up in skill and pretty much every time I would move up, I would start to lose a little bit and then I would figure it out. But I had no discipline. It would get to the end of the night and I would stop playing well, right? I was
Mm.
just looking for action at that point.
Right. So, you're 18, 19, you're playing poker, and when does it start no, I'm not asking when did you say, "Oh man, I have a problem," but like when did you start noticing, or when looking back on it now, do you realize that the break even nights and the winning sessions started becoming few and far between, and it started to escalate? And did you go into the pits? Did you start playing anything else besides poker?
Yeah, so I I don't think I ever thought about it as a problem when I was in college. And I never really played any other games because I would have been embarrassed,
Mm,
right? I was really snobbish about poker and I really saw it as a skill game.
mm,
And, if my friend saw me spinning a slot machine, I would have been embarrassed, right?
mm,
That is not what we did. Which is funny because like later on, I played all of the slots,
mm,
right? So I graduated from college and I ended up moving to Sao Paulo, Brazil to teach English. Um, and I intended to stay there just for a couple months and travel around. I was a poor kid coming out of college. I didn't have very much money. And I really fell in love with Brazil and I ended up staying down there for like 2.5, maybe 3 years.
wow.
And I played poker a lot down there.
Mm,
It was actually like when I first moved there, I didn't speak any Portuguese really. But poker was a real universal game,
mm,
So I quickly made some friends through a student that I was teaching and started playing, and that became a lot of my social group, you know? And there were some times in Brazil where, I had won and then I had, money in my pocket and I would get on a bus and Sao Paulo was kind of dangerous or I played in some underground games. One of them got held up, and everybody got robbed. And I was like, man, okay, this is a little sketchy.
yeah.
Like maybe I need to chill out. But really, the turning point for me in gambling was my dad got sick. He got diagnosed with a pretty rare form of cancer, and his prognosis was not very good. And so after kind of building this life for myself that was really hard down in Sao Paulo, I moved back home, kind of, on the, immediately, right? And all of a sudden, there I was, like 23 years old, living in my mom's basement, back home with my friends who I had kind of lost touch with. I had this very different life experience, where these guys had graduated college and they immediately went into the workforce and they were ahead of me.
Mm,
Like the way that I saw it was, man, these guys are ahead of me and I need to catch up to them, right? Um and I went to a bar with my two best friends who are big time sports guys. They both work in professionally for sports organizations and they introduced me to sports betting. And I think more importantly for me, betting online. And really, two things happened. Like, one, again, it was this immediate connection of like, I'm one of the guys. I was never a huge sports fan, but I knew how to gamble and I liked gambling, and it made me pay attention to the game and read the stats and all of that stuff. Um, and two, it totally removed every barrier that I had between me and my ability to gamble. Like, physically, I didn't have to make that 45-minute drive to the casino. My phone was just in my pocket. And I think worse for me, it removed the kind of social responsibility of, well, yeah, man, if I'm in a casino and I'm at a slot machine, somebody's going to see me, but not if I'm on my phone,
mm,
right? Nobody knows what I'm doing.
mm-hmm.
And I went from like $5 or $10 on the Golden State Warriors at a bar with my friends socially to, $200 on, on Ukrainian women's field hockey at 2 in the
Yeah.
morning within a span of like 3 months,
Yeah.
maybe. It just got totally out of control. And then to really compound that, I started working in the tech industry in the Bay
Mm.
Area, right? And I went from making, I think my first job I made $25,000 a year in San Francisco.
Don't forget
So,
Wendy's. Don't forget Wendy's.
oh yeah, 100%. Everybody should work a fast
Oh
food
my
job
God.
or retail
Oh,
job at
I'm
least
not
once.
throwing shade. I have so many questions, and I will be asking them.
But yeah, man, I went from making $25,000 a year to $125,000 a year in probably 18 months,
Mm.
and that was terrible for me because one of the ironies about my own gambling experience is I've always been really good with money. Like I'm one of those kids that has had a budget since they were like 13. And the way that I looked at it was, okay, I pay my rent, I pay for my food, and then everything else is fun money. And it doesn't matter if I'm spending my money on gambling or if I'm spending my money on enriching experiences.
So
Like,
right. So you say you had a budget, but like you really didn't because you weren't saving and you weren't.
oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I wasn't
Right.
saving, but I just mean like whatever was left over after I paid my base
Right. Right.
expenses, it was just money that went to gambling, and I am a crazy minimalist. Like my wife always teases me. She has to buy all the clothes that I need when I like, go meet clients because I have like four t-shirts and a pair of pants and I'm very
Well, yeah. I
happy.
mean, you're also like a rock star, so you've lived that like drummer life. You know what I mean? I love. Trust me, I envy that. Like that's yeah. Um,
Yeah,
but no.
man.
Go ahead.
So, yeah. Oh no. So, I started working and I love to work. I've always loved to work. And, it got to the point really quickly where I was working 60 or 70 hours a week pretty consistently and then just lighting my money on
Mm,
fire on the weekends. And I don't know that there was like a moment. I can't tell you like, oh man, I made one bet and I just felt like a total degenerate. But it was this slow creep where I just realized, man, I'm losing control. Like, you know, I'm going to only bet on basketball and soccer. I'm going to only bet on games that I watch to the point where, I'm going to bet on everything, right? I would wake up at 6 or 7 in the morning and the first thing I would do in bed is just plan out my bets for the
mm,
day. And I would watch sports that I didn't care about on my computer at work and I would leave work a little early and be watching the scores, like not even the games, just the scores on my phone, just refresh, refresh,
Gamecast.
refresh.
Yeah.
Totally. And I just got really, really
Hmm.
embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
You know, I and I think one of the things that made it really hard was that my outward success, right? Like if I got a promotion at work or if a band that I was playing at was doing well, people would be like, "Oh, hey man, like congratulations, you must be so stoked. Things are great." And I just had this growing feeling inside that I just hated myself, that I was just
Mm,
really ashamed of what I was doing. Um, and where it really got bad was, I did that for probably 4 or 5 years. I don't know how much money I lost, but tens of thousands of dollars, right? Hundreds of thousands of
yeah.
dollars. Not, a $50,000 weekend in Vegas, just consistent losses
Well, so
every
that's what I
week.
was going to ask is, you know, oftentimes you hear in these 12-step meetings that, the numbers aren't important. It's all relative. But I think to give the listeners some context as far as like the percentage of your income. So what would you say? What would you
Oh
say
yeah.
during like that 5 year stretch was like your monthly nut? Like what were your expenses
Yeah, I think my expenses in the Bay were probably like two or three
a
thousand
month?
dollars,
Right. So then,
a month.
but you're probably taking home 6, 7 thousand a month.
Yes, yeah,
So
six
would
or
it be
seven.
so
And
it's fair to say
so,
that like you were spending, like 3 to 5 thousand a month gambling?
oh yeah, easy, easy.
And did you
And
at
I wasn't saving
right?
anything,
And
you know.
did you ever cross that line into borrowing or taking out loans?
You know, I didn't, and this is one of the things that made me feel like I don't have a
Mm,
problem, right? At that point, I was like, well, if I was really addicted, I wouldn't be able to
right,
stop,
right.
you know? And I would be borrowing money from people, but I wasn't. I would just get my bank account to zero. And when it got really crazy, when I was 27 or 28, I got to this point where, it was Monday and my paycheck came on Friday. And I had already lost my gambling money. And I would have this whole plan in my head. Friday is going to come. I'm going to pay off these bills. I'm going to take $2,000 and I'm going to stretch it until the next paycheck. At that point, I wasn't even trying to win. I was just trying to have enough ammunition so that I never had to be out of action because then I was really
Mm.
uncomfortable. And my paycheck would come on Friday at like 7 a.m. and I wouldn't even make it to the card room. All of that money would be gone within an hour or two, and I couldn't stop
Mm.
myself. And then I would punish myself until the next paycheck came. And the way that I would punish myself is I would go to the gym and work myself out into exhaustion, right? Like right now, I am, I'm 5'6", 5'7". I'm like a pretty small guy. And I think that a pretty comfortable weight for me to be walking around at is like 155, 160. That's like me pretty active. It got down to a point where I was like 135
Mm.
pounds. I was just like, I started running, I started doing marathons, I started doing ultra marathons that were just like fueled by my
I mean,
self
there's worse things,
hatred.
but yeah, the inspiration
Totally,
for
man.
it, that's yeah, that's tough.
And again, like that was, I never had success with women, right? Like I never really felt like I was successful, but all of a sudden I was like, I had this big job, I was in really good shape. People were like, "Oh my God, you must be so
Yeah,
happy."
yeah.
Right? I was like, I fucking hate myself,
Mm.
right? Um, and that was really the kind of turning point for me. It was like I achieved the things on paper that I had told myself for so long were going to make
Mm.
me happy and fulfilled. And I was totally empty and I was totally not present in my life. I would be on dates looking under the phone looking under the table at my phone, looking at the scores of a game or, playing music and being on stage and being like, I can't wait for this set to be over so that I can go and gamble,
Yeah.
you know?
And so, did poker take a
And
back seat during the sports betting time?
yeah, it wasn't
Right,
fast enough.
right.
I would play poker in person at a local club in
Mm.
Oakland. But when I was sitting at the poker table, I would have a slot machine on my phone, right? Or I would have bets on the game that was being televised or, the guy sitting next to me, I'd be like, I bet you $50 that the next card
Yeah,
is red, you
yeah.
know?
And so the
Like,
one thing that so my gambling started right before it went crazy on the phones and mobile and stuff. But I have never been a guy who, even like, I know towards the end of my gambling, you could go on these like crazy websites and like pay with crypto to do a slot machine. There's something about that disconnect of it's a computer that I could just, my gambling mind could never, even though it was probably the same exact odds as a slot machine in a casino, I just couldn't. Nah, that's just too. It's fixed. Like online blackjack, it's fixed. But I'm gonna guess the reason that you got hooked is because you actually won at one point, right? Is that
oh yeah,
that's
yeah,
otherwise?
totally. I've had a couple times that I won. I won early on a slot machine. I hit one of the like crazy bonuses. I think I had a $2 bet and I won like
Yeah.
ten
See, that's
thousand
all. That's all
dollars.
it takes. Because once your addict
Yeah,
brain experiences that, you think you can do it again. Yeah.
100%. And what was funny about that is I lied to all my friends. I was like, "Yeah, I won a poker
Oh,
tournament,"
right,
because that
right.
was a skill
Yeah.
game, right? I would never tell them. Um, yeah. So I mean, at that point, like I just think about the money that I
Mm,
lost. Like you said, 50 or 60% of my income for a
mm.
decade, right? But if you add into that the money that I won and then lost, right? I'm sure that I'm, hundreds
Oh
of
yeah.
thousands of dollars. Um, and then when I turned 30, after 7 or 8 years of this, I started looking around at my friends and they were, in long-term committed relationships and they were buying houses and, I had nothing. I hated myself. I felt fraudulent to everybody that I knew, I like to be an open book. My friends would have told you, oh yeah, Sam is like super honest and trustworthy, um, and I just felt terrible. And at that point, I said, okay, like I have a problem and I need to do something about it. And so I went online to like Psychology Today and I just found a therapist. I didn't know that there was such a thing as a, certified gambling counselor. I was never going to call 1-800-GAMBLER. I just didn't think that that was for me. I thought that was for people with real
Right.
problems,
Right.
quote unquote. And I found this therapist. I walked in and I said, I have this gambling problem. I need to stop gambling and I can't. At that point, I had tried to stop cold turkey 100 times and I could string together a couple days or a week maybe, but inevitably I would slip and relapse and the whole thing would start over. And when I think about kind of my mindset at that point, I felt like I was walking into the emergency room with a wound.
Right.
It was like I was bleeding from my head. And this therapist was like, you know, tell me about your childhood and trauma and what you're trying to escape from. And that just didn't resonate for me. I am a middle class white kid that grew up in Oakland, California in the 90s. I have a lot of friends that have nothing compared to what I have. And, the support that I had from my family and my friends and the opportunities and the college degree and stuff. And I just felt like, man, I am such a baby. Like real people with real problems have this problem. I'm just weak. And they asked me to go to Gamblers Anonymous, which I didn't know existed before then. And I was like, no way. I live in the Bay. I've grown up here. If I walk in there, I'm going to get busted.
Right.
Somebody's going to know
Right.
me. And so I waited until I was on a business trip in Phoenix and finally I went. And it was exactly kind of the picture that I had in my head, right? It was this dusty church basement, kind of out of the way. And I walked in and I said, my name is Sam. I'm a compulsive gambler. And I think there was some power in that. I had never said those words. I had never really been in a room with other people that I knew had this problem. But man, I looked around that room and I was the youngest person by like 30 years. And at that point, I,
Yeah.
I was 30, I
Right.
I wasn't 20. And I'm talking about gambling with cryptocurrency on my cell phone at my tech job. And these guys are talking about being in recovery for 20 years from the horse
Right.
track in the 80s. And I just felt like, man, these guys don't get it, right? Like they don't understand me. I am the
So
odd one out.
and I
And it
I was gonna
wasn't
say
them.
I see that part of it, but when you read the yellow book for the first time, that didn't resonate with you, or that didn't like blow your mind, like that it was describing your mindset, or oh, okay,
Oh, it totally did. I think I answered yes
yeah,
to 20
yeah,
questions. Right? But I was so it definitely resonated for me and it definitely was this moment of clarity of like I don't have a
and are
problem,
you
like
still
I am
gambling
addicted,
during
right?
this? Are
Like
you still
I
gambling leading up to Phoenix, and like when you went into the meeting, were
Oh
you still
yeah,
gambling?
I'm trying really hard not to, but I'm like
Right.
going to therapy, paying $150 an hour, leaving and gambling on my phone, walking back to my house.
Yeah.
You know, like lying to the therapist.
Hmm.
And, it wasn't that I didn't resonate or I didn't recognize that I had a problem. It was that I didn't resonate with the
Right.
solution. I forced myself to go to GA probably 3 to 6 months, at
Hmm.
least a few times a week. And it just got to this point where I was like, man, I would rather be addicted to gambling and live my life than have to spend an hour every day in
Oh
a
man,
meeting
that
like
stinks.
this.
But I get it. Yeah.
It stinks, man. And, I have
Right.
nothing against GA. Like, I think GA is a great organization. I
Right.
just
Right.
wasn't
Right.
ready, and I wasn't, I had this young
And
punk ass
what year was
mindset.
this?
Like, whew, 2016 probably. Um, and yeah, man, after, 6 months of therapy and GA, I literally just made the decision like, okay, I've been hiding this for a decade. Like, I'm just going to keep going because I'll try to stop and I'll try to have, periods of abstinence.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to live, I don't want to replace my gambling addict lifestyle for a recovery lifestyle because it wasn't attractive to me, which was obviously a huge mistake.
Mm.
At that point, I gave up and I just said, this is who I am. This is just part of my personality.
Right.
And over the next 18 months, like the wheels just fell off the bus.
Mm.
I started drinking more, which was never a thing that I was really into. My nickname in college was like two beer because I just like, you know, Santa Barbara was a big party school
Yeah.
and that was not my thing. And I stopped sleeping. Like I was sleeping probably 2 hours a night, maybe, and working, 70 hours a week. And, I started using cocaine at first recreationally, and then, literally to like keep myself awake and make up for my sleep deficit. And I met this incredible woman at a pizza place and um we started dating and I really felt like she's the one, and we'd been together for a couple years and I proposed to her in like the summer of 2019 and she said yes. And then 2 months into our engagement, she sat me down and she was like, "Look, I don't know what's going on with you. I don't know if you have a drug problem. I don't know if you're cheating on me, but like 80% of the time, you're this guy that I want to marry, and 20% of the time, you're a total shithead, right? Like, you either need to tell me what's happening or we're not going to get married." And for me, like, gambling wasn't on her list of
Mm.
possibilities, right? Like she knew that I gambled and sometimes I would come home after winning and like give her money.
Mm-hmm.
I would never talk to her about losses, but I'd be
Yeah.
like, let's go out to a nice dinner. But it wasn't even on her list. And, B, rationally at that point, I so understood that gambling was ruining my life, you know, but I couldn't stop. And I just thought, if I choose gambling over this woman that is my future, that is like everything that I want, I am a total piece of shit, right? And I there's no point in me being around. So I made a really clear decision that I was either going to tell her and I was going to quit, not for me, but for her. And if I couldn't do that, if I like betrayed her, I was going to kill myself because it just wasn't worth it. Um, and I got really, really lucky. I told her, and she basically said, "I don't know anything about this, right? I have no experience with gambling. I don't really have experience with addiction, but like, you're smart. I'm smart. We can figure it out. People figure it out. Like, let's do it."
I mean,
And
what a
that
what
was
a
the
what
game
a what
changer.
a fucking guardian angel she is. I mean,
Oh my God, dude.
like,
I
I mean,
yeah, so spoiler alert, she's my
yeah,
wife now. We've been together for 8 or 9
amazing.
years and I wouldn't be here
Yeah.
without her. I mean, there's no doubt. And I think opening up to somebody and breaking the isolation for me was the first step that I really needed to get myself on track. And then it was really logistical, like I gave up financial control
Mm-hmm.
and I cut off access to my gambling fuel and I started reading a lot about the neuroscience of
Mm.
addiction and the neuroscience of gambling. And when I think about it, in my youth, I had done a fair amount of drugs. Like I like to smoke weed and I had done some psychedelics and things. And I had this perspective of like, that's not me. That is drunk Sam, or that is Sam when he's stoned. And If I let the drugs wear off, I'm going to come back to me, like who I really am, right? And understanding what was happening in my brain when I gambled and the dopamine levels that I was screwing up in my head, it reframed my perspective on my gambling from, I am this morally bankrupt, shitty person to I am actively putting a drug in my brain. And when I do that, I don't like the person that I am. And if I can stop doing that for long enough, I'm going to reset my neurochemistry. And then I'm going to be able to continue my life the way that I want to live it,
I mean,
right?
that's so
Um,
fascinating. Yeah. I mean, it makes so much sense.
yeah, man, it really helped me get
So
out of the
now,
shame. And I,
real quick, just
yeah,
so
go ahead.
the 18 months, I'm always interested in people that relapse or people that enter these rooms and then they somehow go back out to gambling after they've read and after they've heard people's stories. And obviously for someone like me who gambled for 20 years, from the moment I set foot in a room, I have never wanted to gamble again. So there's always this
Mm.
it's just puzzling to me. But so can you just explain to me how once you had been in those rooms for 6 months, once you had read the yellow book, once you had heard all the things that gambling does to you, understanding you have a disease, understanding that you're powerless over it, what is going through your head in those final 18 months when the wheels fell off and you're actively gambling, knowing all of this information that you got from GA? Like, what is that like? All right, little cliffhanger for you guys this week. That was the first half of my conversation with Sam of Evive, not Evive. Thank you so much to Sam. Part 2 will be this Monday, June 9th. You guys see this shirt, right? I mean, it's literally a replica of the Rabies Michael Scott shirt, color-wise. Like, how do you guys not want these shirts? Let's go. Come on. By the way, today's Thursday. We're walking 12 miles in 3 days. I know Jen is confirmed. My family's confirmed, including Drew. He asked if he could run the 12. I said, if you want. Classic Drew. But he will be there. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please like every video. Follow us on Instagram at Modern Meeting. If you have any questions or if someone you know wants to share their story or you want to share your story, email me at modernmeetingpod@gmail.com. So as you know, nothing you're ever going to hear in the Modern Meeting, with the exception of our personal stories, is from us. Everything we talk about, we've either heard in these rooms or we've read in the literature. With that being said, as you guys know, when someone calls 1-800-GAMBLER or the gambling hotline in New England, I'm one of the people that answers the phone. And I have admitted that I am not probably following protocol all the time when someone calls. I'm not just going to pull up my phone and tell people where the nearest meetings are. Of course, I end up telling them that, but I want to hear what they have to say. I want to hear their story. I want to offer to tell my story. I want them to feel comfortable asking me literally any question that they want about recovery, addiction, my experience. And someone called me the other night actually. It was like 2 a.m. I'm not going to lie, sometimes I don't answer the calls because I'm tired or it's 2 a.m. and I'll let someone else answer it. But I was awake, I was editing the pod, so I picked up. I'm not going to get into details, obviously, but what started out as him cracking jokes like people sometimes do as a defense mechanism or if they've had a few, 40 minutes later was what I thought ended up being a really productive conversation. I didn't hear the pain in his voice, but I felt his hopelessness. He had an excuse for everything. But by the end of the conversation, he sounded better. He acknowledged certain things. At the beginning, it sounded like he was alone in the world. By the end of it, he admitted he had a mother that was still with us. He had friends that were concerned for him. And I had him considering asking his mother or one of those friends to take him to his first meeting. Whether he goes to a meeting or not, I'll most likely never know. But I'm so grateful for the conversation. Not only for the opportunity to help someone else, but selfishly what I get from hearing from someone who's still out there. Someone who got to the point where he decided to pick up a phone and talk to a stranger about how he's feeling and how he can't stop making these bad decisions. So many times when we gambled while the ball was spinning around the roulette wheel, or we parlayed that hard ways, or we're all in after the flop and you're standing at the table with your cards face up. What do gamblers always say in those spots? One time. Come on, baby. One time. How about one time to make that one good decision? That one good decision, that one time that starts the road back. You never know what's going to stick. What's going to hit you like a ton of bricks? What's going to give you that spiritual awakening? One time. Is it a decision to see a peer specialist? Is it walking into a 12-step meeting? Is it making a phone call to the hotline? You won't know. You can't know until you try. One time. We'll see you on the other side.